Welcome everybody to the Acronis webinar, Get Fast Facts on the Log4J vulnerability, act quickly to neutralize it now. I'm your host, James Slaby, Director of Cyber Protection at Acronis. Thanks everybody for joining us on short notice. But as you see, the cyber threat that we're gonna talk about today is a really bad one. It's dangerous, it's spreading fast, and worst of all, it exploits Java, which runs on an estimated 3 billion devices and services. That's 3 billion with a B. So there's a high probability you have it in your organization, as do your partners and customers. And cybercriminals have really ramped up attacks exploiting this vulnerability since it was first disclosed last Friday. So we all have to really jump on this one. If you're an Acronis managed service provider, partner, or reseller partner, you can expect your clients and customers to be reading all the press coverage that's going on about it in the business as well as the tech press and looking to you for help. I think that by the end of this half hour or so, you should have some answers for them. I think as you're going to see, the big challenge with Log4j is not about advanced persistent threat attacks or ransomware or how you're going to deploy machine intelligence in your cyber protection stack or where you're going to find cybersecurity talent in a labor shortage for it. Though the Log4j vulnerability does really underscore all of those issues and enable some of those problems. Really, the root of the problem for most of us is going to be this kind of old and prosaic one in cybersecurity, which is the issue of inventory. You know, the problem for a lot of businesses is that we don't know all the applications and services that we're running, let alone which ones have Java with logging enabled, and you can't patch what you don't know is there. All right, let's get started with a few housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded. We're going to email you a link to the recording afterwards so that you can share it with colleagues who couldn't be here today. Your microphone will be muted throughout the event, so please submit your questions through the Zoom Q&A interface. We have a couple of Acronis experts manning that Q&A interface. They'll answer some of your questions via text on that, and they'll also hand some to me for me to present to our panel during the live Q&A session later in the event. Okay, let me introduce our speakers. Our main man today is Kevin Reed, Chief Information Security Officer for Acronis. He and his staff have spent several long days and nights lately battling Log4j, which is sometimes referred to as Log4 shell. That's really the exploit. Most of this half hour will be Kevin's show. On the Zoom Q&A and maybe popping up on screen to answer some live questions later are Topher Tebow, the Senior Malware Researcher at Acronis, and Collin Apodac, who's the Manager of Solutions Engineering here at Acronis. All right, let's get a quick look at the agenda. It's a short and to the point one. Our CISO is going to take you through a kind of a crash course on the Log4j vulnerability, what it is, why it's so dangerous, how the bad guys are already using it to inject malware into Java apps and services, the types of attacks and damage that those malware injections can cause to happen, and the steps you need today to protect yourself and your clients against it. Kevin's also going to spend some time walking through Acronis's own internal response to the threat and how we vetted Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud and other Acronis products to make sure this vulnerability has been neutralized. With that, I will hand it over to our star speaker, Kevin Reed. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, James. And hi, everyone. And indeed, that's not going to be a sales call. I just will share some of my experience, what we've learned, and what you can use to protect your organizations or customers. So let's first discuss what is Log4j and what is Log4 shell vulnerability. Log4j is a library that is being used for logging in Java. And believe it or not, logging is complicated sometimes. So there is a full library dedicated just to that. And it's quite flexible. If you look at a modern application, I have like a sample here. It may consist from multiple pods on the back end that we refer to as microservices nowadays. And actually, every microservice doesn't even need to be vulnerable, or all of them needs to be vulnerable, or even written in Java. It's enough that somewhere in your infrastructure, there is a component that would somehow touch this exploit, and I'll explain later on how the exploit itself works. So let's first consider what are the pros. There are two versions of Log4j, version 1 and version 2, like two trains. And so version 1, train version 1, is not affected by this vulnerability. It may be affected by others, but not by this one. However, almost all, like actually all, but the very latest ones, versions from the second train are affected by this one. So if you have any application that is using Log4j version 2 to something, that you most probably are vulnerable to that. As James mentioned, many companies, many organizations do use this library, and there is an extensive list of those organizations started as I believe a GitHub repo, and then it's being picked up by CISO at some point, and there is a link available to you. So to understand how it works, how the exploit works, let's first consider this modern application. As I said, it may consist of a couple of microservices on the back end, and each of those microservices talk to each other via some kind of RPC. It could be REST, which is very common, could be Apache Thread, could be gRPC if you are like kind of hip and modern, could be anything. Now, of course, some of those applications may want to log the data that we receive from our clients. And one of the most common examples would be to log a user agent, which is like a browser name and version, so that you can have stats about your audience. Now, consider a situation when an attacker sends a typical request, and then they supply the exploit within the user agent HTTP header. And then that request get processed by the web front end, which is not vulnerable. It could be Nginx, even Apache web server, which is not vulnerable, by the way. And then it forwarded to one of the internal microservices that doesn't need even to be written in Java. Could be anything, Python, PHP, Golang. And then forwarded another one, and that one could potentially be written in Java. And that second microservice would decide then maybe to log down the user agent that was supplied with the initial request on the front end. And that is the moment when the exploit hits the Log4j library. And as a result, the application will open a back connect. In this case, you can see from inside of your network back to the attacker's side, in this case to their malicious LDAP server. Or even the other application does not need to be vulnerable at all. The application itself could write log to a file, and that would be totally fine and no exploit executed there. But then this file will be parsed through, I don't know, some transport, could be Apache Kafka, could be something else, and then eventually it could hit some log parsing application in your infrastructure. And very common one is Elastic Logstash. And Elastic Logstash, as we know now, is vulnerable to the CVE. And so again, Elastic Logstash could be exploited, and then from inside of your network, deep from your infrastructure, it will open a connect back to the attacker and receive commands from there. And then the data may be written to the log store, but by this point, it's already too late. The important point here is that the time between the actual request and the exploit triggered is not immediate. It doesn't need to be immediate. Like your logs could be delayed for a matter of minutes, or maybe sometimes even hours. Maybe you like combine them together and then you do a batch processing. And only then the exploit will be triggered. So you need to take this into account when you're trying to scan your premises with the scanners that now are available publicly. If you don't get an immediate response, it does not mean that your application is not vulnerable at the moment. It could be that the exploit will be triggered at a later date, maybe next day, or maybe by the end of the week when you do a batch processing. Now, when we understand how the exploit is triggered, let's look at the exploit structure itself. Java is a wonderful language that was built on the mistakes that we learned from C++. And there are a couple of things in C++ that were annoying to programmers. Among them, there was memory management. That was a terrible thing, and maybe everybody here on this call might recall more than one exploit that was related to buffer overflows. It was a very common problem back then. But then there was another thing, like everything should be an object. Like Java is fully object-oriented language. And the third problem that C++ did have was very weak and not expressive standard library back then. And so Java decided that, okay, the Java standard library, like the ability to do things staying within Java, would be much larger, and there would be more flexibility and more things to do there. So one of those things would be what is called the Java naming and directory interface, GNDI. GNDI is an API within Java, it's part of Java, that allows a Java program to connect to directory services. And it could be many directory services. The most popular is obviously LDAP, but there are others. DNS is a directory service. Corba, if someone still remember that name, had a directory service built in, which was called Common Object something, I guess Common Object Service, and so on and so forth. There are multiple. So interestingly, Log4J allowed to parse the GNDI references within the strings that were passed into the log. And so if you decided to log a user agent, and this user agent eventually hits Log4j library, and within the user agent itself, there is a line that looks like a GNDI reference, and you see one on your screen, then Java or Log4j will tell Java, okay, I want to parse this GNDI reference, and I want to resolve the object. And so the way how it works is that you have the reference to GNDI. This is the first part of this line. And then the second line is the second part is the protocol to be used for for accessing the object. As I said, Java is an object-oriented language, and so everything is an object there. So the second part of that is the protocol that you are going to use to retrieve this object. And the third part is actually the reference to what is called the lookup API within GNDI that would allow you to look up for this object on the host that you are referred to. Now, as I said, everything is an object in Java, but when you receive a few bytes or maybe a bunch of bytes over the network, you cannot consider them to be an object. So there is an extra step in between that is called deserialization that converts this stream of bytes into something that Java can interpret as an object. So normally that would be an object that could be, in a normal situation, it would be an object that would contain a LDAP response, like LDAP object, LDIF. But unfortunately, the way how it works is that it could be a Java class. And Java class itself is an object because, again, everything is an object in Java. And Java class is basically an executable. So if Java encounters a Java class reference, it just executes it. So what happens in this situation is that you're trying to resolve this GNDI reference that you received from somewhere else. You connect to this site and you expect to get an object back, and you indeed receive an object. Unfortunately, this object is a Java class. And so you execute it, your application executes it. And this is why we get this remote command execution. So how this whole thing could be used by the bad guys? There are a couple of things that we already see and other cybersecurity companies see happening. The most obvious ones is you have remote code execution within your perimeter, like deep inside of your infrastructure. That's a great entry point to start stealing your data. It's the most obvious thing. But also, it is something where the attackers, the cyber criminals, could start by doing their reconnaissance before they deploy a ransomware or do whatever they want. The lower end guys, so to say, that are not sophisticated, they just deploy crypto miners right on top of the box. Like they compromise the box, but they don't care what is running there, what organization they happen to land in. They just start a crypto miner and they're trying to mine Bitcoin or Ethereum or Monero or any other cryptocurrency. Or alternatively, since they usually they land up on a Fed server. And so it does make sense to use it as a part of botnet, maybe for DDoS attacks or something like that. And so what we saw on our services, we obviously monitor them. And on this slide, you see a real graph over the last 6 days, starting last Friday, of the exploits that we observed trying to hit in Acronis premises. So this is a logarithmic scale, which means that Friday you can see, and every bar is 1 hour. So on Friday, the slower ones is just single digits hits. So like we had under 10 hits in 1 hour, and the larger bar is like dozens maybe. And as you can see, on Friday, we had maybe a few dozens of those exploitation attempts. And then over the weekend, it suddenly started growing, and we quickly moved into hundreds and then eventually to thousands range. And by yesterday, you can see someone came up with a great idea to launch DNS-backed, not LDAP-backed GNDI exploits, but DNS-backed GNDI exploits. And those end up being in the range of tens of thousands per hour. So as you can see, this is quite massive. So we had to respond quickly. Let's now talk a little bit about what did we do to respond to this threat, and what lessons did we learn, and what you can use to protect your companies, your networks, and your applications. So I'm based in Singapore, which means that by the time the news about the Log4J vulnerability became public on Friday evening, I actually was already offline with my family, and I didn't catch it. And so on Saturday morning, I woke up to like this meteor storm everywhere. And I thought, okay, like that is going to be bad, and we definitely need to do something about that. To my surprise, not to my surprise, but I was pleased to learn that my team in Europe, that works with 8 hours later, picked it up and took ownership of the whole situation, and they started to do two work streams in the parallel. So on one thing, they started looking at Acronis applications, so we could help and advise our customers about their security. And also the second work stream was to protect Acronis, and especially Acronis Cyber Cloud, from the potential attacks. As you can see, there were quite a few of them. And so we did it in 2 stages. The first stage was a poke around. There were no immediate response from vendors, and the vendors themselves were evaluating the situation and vulnerabilities in their products. So at the poke around stage, we understood that in order for exploit to function, the application needs to be able to connect back to an attacker's site, which means that if you block back connects from your network to the outside, you can prevent exploit from running. So the application would try to connect, but it would not get the Java class back and so the RCE will not trigger. So that was the first thing we did, and it was quite successful. When you do this on Linux, if you need to protect Linux servers, the obvious choice to do that, it would be IP tables. So in our situation, obviously the whole layout was more complex, but you can easily start with permitting all internal communication, all internal egress communications, and then denying everything else. And then most probably will be sufficient as a very fast response. Maybe we'll need to enable another couple of ports or a couple of external hosts that may happen. But as a quick workaround, this will work for a few hours or maybe a couple of days. And then I think by Monday timeframe, news came out that there is this second vector besides LDAP that would allow an attacker to leak the information about the environment variables. And so we looked at that and we reviewed all environment variables that would potentially leak if the exploit triggered. And here on your screens, you see a way how you can do that in your Linux application. In Windows, you can just use Process Explorer or something of a similar current to look at environment variables. And so in our situation, we concluded that actually the applications do not have any sensitive environment variables within their memory. So there will be no gain for attacker if they even execute the exploit successfully. However, in your situation, it could be different. I've seen reports about attackers stealing the AWS secrets that were available as environment variables. So take a look into that. And then in one specific environment for a specific customer, we actually just completely removed GNDI lookup class from the Log4J library. Again, you can see a way to do that. And those three things together help us to function until the official fixes arrive from vendors. So at this point, we moved to a fixed stage, and Elastic, for example, shipped their fixes by the end of Monday, and then we started applying them one by one in our production. We're doing some testing. We also were running by the moment when we were sure that the environment is secure, we actually ran a hunting round for potential indicators of compromise in our servers. And Acronis CyberProtect is a great tool to do that. It allows to detect a wide range of malware. As I mentioned, some attackers just deploying crypto miners, and Acronis CyberProtect has a crypto miner detection module both for Windows and Linux. So you can use that. If you prefer to use open source, there are tools like Rootkit Hunter. There is a very generic one, and then it can try you to understand whether there is some malware deployed on your host. However, if you want to do it at scale, you need some automation. And also you need to understand what you're doing, because Rootkit Hunter output requires some expertise in how Linux works to properly interpret it. So if you don't know what to do, I think anti-malware solution maybe is a better approach at this point. We did not find any signs of successful exploitation of this vulnerability in CyberProtect Cloud, and we didn't find any. The situation under control until 17 hours ago, when news came out about the new vulnerability 45046, which affected the most recent Log4J library that was updated by Apache the day before. So I thought, okay, this is back to square one and we need to re-evaluate everything. But it turned out that actually no, and in our configuration, the job is mostly done and we are safe. In the meanwhile, I mentioned there was another work stream. Our application security team looked in our products and worked with R&D team to understand what might be vulnerable and what is not vulnerable. And at this point, I'm happy to report that we already concluded our investigations, and all Acronis on-prem products are not vulnerable to this CVE. And as I said, there are things that were dangerous in Acronis Cloud are already mitigated at this point. And with that, back to James.
Thank you so much for that, Kevin. You know, there are times when I thought it would be cool to have your job, and then I see like this past weekend, and I'm pretty happy where I am. Audience, I hope you can stick around for about 10 minutes while we take your questions live. Keep them coming to us through the Zoom Q&A interface. Topher and Collin have been feeding them to me, and they're going to be joining us to help answer your questions. So let's see what we have here. Okay, audience question number one. If my application does not have Log4j, but integrated with third-party applications that are vulnerable, will the vulnerable application be able to query my application and pull the data out? Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. I think Topher's...
Thank you, Topher. Those awkward pauses are best ended as fast as possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, as far as one application being affected by this, if it's not specifically using this, it really essentially, obviously there's going to be interactions between different applications. If there's any sort of a dependency that has Log4j, within that application, then that's where you're going to be able to see the potential use of this against anything that may not directly use the library. So yes, it is possible.
All right, we have a kind of a related follow-up question. How can an application that is not vulnerable protect itself from third-party integrations that are vulnerable?
Right, and that's where this one really gets kind of sticky. It's obviously you can remove any integrations that may, work with something that's using Log4j, but of course then you start potentially breaking some functionality. It's not necessarily an easy quick fix. Obviously, if you can find the Log4j library, you can update to the latest version, that has the patching in place, but it's not necessarily a quick just update it for just the computer as a whole. You're going to have to look into each application and keep your applications updated as patches are coming out from vendors.
All right, thanks for that. I love this next question. It's appreciate the default deny mindset here. Can't all of this be avoided by removing Java from your host PCs?
Talking again about the broken functionality, broken applications. I mean,
I think the idea here is like let's just nuke everything. And is that how do you feel about that approach?
It's not possible. Like Minecraft, that is like the most critical application at my home, and I just cannot. I have to guess, and I just cannot get rid of it.
Yeah, I think 3 billion devices and services worldwide. It's kind of everywhere in our lives, and disabling it in one place could have potentially unintended consequences in others.
Exactly.
All right, I've got let's see here. Regarding the uninstalled Java topic, if the Java application is not a fundamental application for your business and one can remove it, then can you explain how it may create other problems? Oh, that's great. That's a follow-on to my last point. Collin, you want to take that one?
Sorry about that, James. I think that would probably be a little bit more appropriate for our buddy Topher over there.
Topher.
And I apologize. I was trying to read some questions myself. I
Sorry, we're all multitasking here.
Right.
Yeah.
So what was that one again?
So it's basically if you decide that the application that has Java with logging isn't fundamental to the business and you can remove it, how might that create other problems?
Yes. I mean, again, it's what's depending on that. If it's not fundamental, obviously it was there for a reason. So one, you're going to have to figure out what are you doing instead. It's not just as simple like, oh, we can live without this, let's remove it. And then you need to make sure, again, if you remove the application, but the library remains on the system, you could still potentially see it being exploited. Especially if there's something else, again, you basically have to find every instance of what's using this. And again, with so many applications, so many systems using this particular library, it's not necessarily an easy task. So there's going to be time and resources put into it. There's going to be dependencies that get broken, and you're going to end up with most likely some functionality that your people are used to that just suddenly won't be there, and it's going to make jobs difficult to to perform. In addition to any other potential software breakage.
All right, good stuff. All right, here's one that I can actually take. How long can we expect to deal with this? And the answer I would have there is this really has echoes to my mind of Eternal Blue, which was the exploit that led to the WannaCry and NotPetya ransomware attacks of a few years ago that kind of brought the world's attention to the ransomware threat. And Eternal Blue basically exploited Windows 7. Microsoft issued a patch for it really quickly, but we kept seeing recurrences of these attacks for a couple of years afterwards, just because there was so much Windows 7 out there, even though it was end of lifed. People just couldn't seem to get it out of their networks. They were, who knows, applications that they were afraid wouldn't work on later editions of Windows for whatever reason. Maybe in many cases, the fact that there was Windows 7 systems that they just weren't aware of. And I think we're going to see something similar with this particular exploit because of the ubiquity of Java apps and the fact that inevitably there'll be a lot of businesses that won't find them all, won't patch them all. So cyber criminals are going to continue to quietly exploit it. And one of the ramifications we've seen of that already is them using the exploit to plant hooks for later long-term APT style attacks. So they'll get a foothold in your network. You may have patched up the vulnerability, but that remains there lurking and provides a platform for additional multi-stage attacks. So I think we can expect to see the kind of echoes of this exploit, even though we've very quickly got the patches for it, happening for a couple of years easily. All right. A question from the audience next. Is there a test tool from Acronis where a specific application or URL is vulnerable to Log4j?
I was going to say, we do have, our vulnerability assessment patch management tool that can at least check for outdated versions of applications and help keep you up to date. That's something that as patches are rolled out, you'll be able to start, seeing what applications you're running that are, older versions that may be vulnerable to the Log4j vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. And adding to that as well, we also have hardware and software inventory in the platform. So now we can actually do scans on these assets and do reporting on that to determine which version we actually have running on that system. So we're able to kind of approach this from multiple levels.
Right. And if you do miss something, everything else that's in Cyber Protect Cloud for instance, stop ransomware attacks, automatically recover from any damage they might have wreaked before we detected them, and so forth. Another audience question: has anyone reached out to Java to find out if they are patching their software to prevent the Log4j library from working?
Okay, let me take this one. The vulnerability itself is not in Java. You can argue that it is like an uncommon behavior to have this, as I mentioned, this ability to actually refer to an LDAP server from within a log, but that is not a Java problem itself. It's this Log4j library problem. And Log4j library, Apache Software Foundation that develops Log4j library did already created a fix, and this is Log4j version 2. Yesterday it was 2.15, and now it's 2.16 because the first fix didn't cover all the cases. So the fix is available from Apache Software Foundation, and if you want to update your application that you've developed, by all means, you have this ability right now.
Right, and I also advise you to consider some of the tactics that Kevin Reed talked about that Acronis took in the meantime, is just shutting down the ability of that to communicate externally while you figure out what else you're doing. All right, another question that I'll take here: what other kinds of threats do we need to worry about next year? Yeah, I know we promised in our invitation to this event that we would talk about future threats. We ended up deciding, for the sake of time, to focus only on what you need to do about this particular one. But we do have a very cool recent research that we just published in the form of the Acronis Cyber Threats Report 2022, which talks about what's coming next that you need to worry about, be planning for in your own environment and in services you might offer to your customers. I'll point to a link to that when we get done with the Q&A. Another audience question: how do I know if I've already been attacked using this vulnerability? Topher, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I mean, the obvious answer here, I think, would be to check your log files. You're going to see in there the string that Kevin actually shared earlier. Basically where it's the JNDI with LDAP or DNS or whatever, and the attacker's IP address or web domain. So basically that's going to be the main thing that you're going to look for. If you are seeing any JNDI requests that aren't expected, that's where you're really going to want to run that anti-malware scan on your systems and really start essentially triaging the issue, and of course, obviously in the logs you're going to be getting the information for what to block in your firewalls and applications.
All right, we're running out of time here. Let's try to get to a couple more questions. What part of Acronis Cyber Protect Cloud is vulnerable? Well, that's a biggie. I think we need to answer that one.
Sure. So no part of Acronis Cyber Cloud is vulnerable at this point. The application that constitutes the cyber cloud itself was never vulnerable. It was secure from day one. And so the similar application Cyber Protect 15 that is deployed on-prem is also not vulnerable. We did have bits of the supporting infrastructure within the cyber cloud, which are not part of the product, that were vulnerable. And as I explained, by today, we actually have mitigated them already. We mitigated them by Monday, actually.
Well, that's encouraging. I have a feeling we wouldn't be on this call if we didn't have a good answer to that one. Okay, next audience question: are only Apache servers affected, or can this occur on IIS other web servers?
From my understanding, it's going to be any server that has Java running. If as long as this library is included, it's something that I understand it would be vulnerable. Most of the servers that you're going to see this on probably are going to be Linux, so Apache or something along those lines, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Windows servers aren't, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're excluded.
Yeah, and I think it's also just worth adding to that really quick. The reason for the severity of this vulnerability is because it impacts so many systems out there. So you will be extremely, probably concerned or enlightened about the fact that you have Java probably running on systems that you didn't even know, in all honesty. So it'll be a good exercise to go through your environments anyways, and, triage, just do a little cleanup.
All right, that seems like a good setup for the next question, which is, how can we actually ensure we don't have the Log4j vulnerability in our environment?
So, given that this is mostly going to be on Linux environments where you're going to see this, you can do a search, and I mean, obviously you can do similar things in Windows, but Linux is kind of the easy one for this because of where it's mostly going to be. But you can actually, essentially just do a search on your systems for the Log4j directories and find the version. There's a grep command that you can find online that people have already been putting out there. Simple one-liner that'll show you anywhere that you've got the Log4j library, and from there, it's just a quick look to see which version it is and update that if needed.
All right, we've already gone about 15 minutes longer than we intended to. So I'm going to say that that's all the time that we have for questions. Audience, if we didn't get to your question, we promise we'll follow up with you directly. Before we go, I wanted to point, well, first let me say thank you to Kevin, Collin, Topher, all our folks backstage that helped put this event together in a very short order. I wanted to point you to a handful of additional resources that you might find helpful. There's an ebook that I wrote earlier this year on how to reduce your technology supply chain risk. It's basically a kind of a miniature assessment framework that you can use on your own organization and on your tech vendors to try to understand what your exposures there might be. We have a couple of technical reports on the Log4j vulnerability. There's the full security advisory and an incident report. We've also put up a more general purpose piece up on the Acronis blog. You'll find that probably at the top of the page still today. We also encourage you to download the brand new Acronis Cyber Threats Report 2022. This is the one I mentioned earlier, which is the look ahead that we've got to threats that you're likely to encounter next year. Ton of great, very fresh research in there. Really useful for, we think, for our Acronis partners. Last link on that page is to the Acronis Cyber Protection page. That has a whole collection of educational pieces, links to upcoming events like this, other articles, analyst reports, white papers. So that's kind of a good first stop if you're looking for more kind of background information to help you address this particular issue and others like it. Next, I want to personally invite everyone to join us at our upcoming Acronis CyberFit Summit in Singapore on February 17th and 18th. If you can't be there in person, you can join virtually. We always have great external speakers. It's a very thought leadership and educational type of event. We're not talking about Acronis too much here. Very partner focused. I've talked to many of our partners who attended the previous versions of this event or just in the past weeks in Miami, Switzerland, and Dubai. And the feedback there is that it's well worth your time if you're an Acronis partner. So I hope to see you there either in person or virtually. Finally, I'll say if you've got the means and the inclination, please donate to the Acronis Cyber Foundation. This is our nonprofit project that builds schools and provides technical training to young people in needy parts of the world with sweat and free labor of Acronis employees using their own time in many cases. Your money really goes far there in places where it's really needed. With that, I'll say thanks everybody for taking the time to be with us today. Be safe, be well, be secure. We hope to see you soon at another Acronis virtual event very soon. Thanks again, everybody.